The great aviation writer Ernest Gahn believed that fate was a hunter, stalking each of us and demanding that we reveal our courage or cowardice in its presence. Such did fate on May 12, 1959, confront Evelyn Vieira, who would one day become my mother. As she sat buckled into her flight attendant station, Evelyn's Capital Airlines Constellation made its second approach into a rain-soaked Charleston, West Virginia airport. The airport, which sits atop a mountain, was undergoing construction, and the Connie came in too fast. The crew attempted another go-around but failed. The plane ground looped, hit a mound of dirt created by a runway expansion project, and burst into flames. Amid the fire and smoke, the quick and professional actions of the flight attendants were credited with helping to minimize the loss of life. Fortunately for me, Mom not only survived the accident, she continued to fly for Capital, where she was based in Washington, D.C., and where she met the man who would become my father. My dad was a pilot. He flew all-weather night fighters for the Marines at the end of the Korean conflict and was hired by Eastern Airlines in April 1959. He met Evelyn Vieira in D.C. months after her accident in Charleston. They were engaged on February 29, 1960, and in December of that year, I was born. It might have been the drone of the propellers or the whine of the engines, but something about the Lockheed Electra got my attention early in life. At 3 months old, I had already begun to log miles on the beautiful prop jet. Now I review these family details to try and justify what has become a 42-year love affair with an airplane that has been tucked deeply into my memory and my family's past. Of course, as an airline brat, I flew the Electra and Eastern's Whisper jets often. Yet despite the many hundreds of hours I've logged as a passenger over the years, the ones I remember most vividly, most fondly, were those spent flying in the Electra as a young boy. Eastern's Electra had a sky lounge, and I can recall sitting in that lounge one bright afternoon and looking back at the horizontal stabilizer, then down at all the small cars and yellow buses on the roads. And some things, like a miniature New York City, are hard to forget. Equally hard to forget were the giant propellers that greeted you on entry and exit from the Electra. Each blade was quite a bit taller than I was as a boy and left quite an impression in my memory. I can't say why, but the shape of the blades and the contours of the engines left me for a want of more, and I was always very, very sad to leave an Electra flight. Alas, in 1977 I saw a full-page ad announcing that the final Electra air shuttle flight had been flown for Eastern, and that the plane had been replaced by more quiet jets. To me, quiet wasn't the point. The hum of the Allisons is a sound to be savored, not silenced. But Eastern had gone to an all-jet fleet and abandoned the Electra. Eventually, after years of struggle, the airline itself ran into the harsh reality of the marketplace and fell from the skies in bankruptcy. The impact on my family was hard, but eventually we all realized that the world didn't care that Eastern was gone, and that it wasn't the center of things. We went on with our lives. But an urge not to forget was strongly planted in me, and the Electra once again became my passion. My journey to remember the Electra begins with a long flight from the eastern United States to Alaska. We leave in the early evening and chase the sun through most of the night. The splendid 7-hour sunset competes with the mountain vistas as we cross into the Yukon, and then Alaska, where the sun finally sets. And the glorious northern lights appear on my way to the hotel, much like those depicted in this great photo by Jan Curtis. Alaska has already taken my breath away, and I've yet to even see or hear an Electra. The next morning I arrive back at Anchorage International Airport and find the Re-Evolution Airways Gate Complex and their nearby fixed base operations and cargo facility. My date with the past is finally upon me. Anchorage International in the late 1990s is an exciting place for aviation history. In addition to the Reeve Electras, you might see Caribou, like the one landing, or DC-3s, DC-7s, Convair 580s, C-130s, or a host of international airline jumbo jets, like the NCA Cargo 747 taxiing by 2 of the 3 Electras that Reeve operated until the spring of 2001. But my real desire is to fly an Electra, to soak up all that is unique and interesting about this great airplane before they're retired. Finally, after a briefing by flight dispatch and the captain, I join the engineer and cabin crew as we make our way out to the gate to prepare the airplane for departure. The Reeve ramp personnel work efficiently and professionally to load bags, fuel, and food as I walk around and film the Electra. The large aeroproduct props and silky lines of the Allison engines are exactly as I remember them as a child, and the lines of the Electra seem anything but ready for retirement. Here, the flight engineer completes one of her many pre-flight tasks and inspects the 13-foot diameter props and hand turns them to get oil distributed throughout the spline. Meanwhile, the front cargo door on N-178RV is being opened so that baggage can be conveyed into the combi-style compartment. This compartment can be configured in many ways to accommodate various passenger and cargo demands for a given flight, ranging from 28 passengers and 4 pallets to a full 66-passenger configuration. While all the activity outside continues, the Reeve ground crew also works to prepare the interior. This crewman is tying off the small cargo hold in 1968 RV, which can seat 84 passengers as shown. The ramp and cabin teams work seamlessly as the busy dance of loading materials, checking the cockpit, and preparing the cabin for passengers continues. Finally, the captain arrives, and the passengers walk on the tarmac right by the airplane. And I think that something important has been lost with the advent of jetways. Perhaps the sense of adventure and romance of nearly touching the bird that would help us make the world a smaller place. In any case, this Electra is about to depart, and we should hop aboard and prepare for the pushback, which is quite exciting as the 4 big props are started in sequence, as shown in this next segment. The pushback at Anchorage is done with a 3-man team, 1 in the tug, 1 working at the nose of the Electra, and the 3rd on the outside wingtip. On this flight, they perform a flawless push, as seen from the tug view, and we hear the distinctive wind-up of the Allison engine. As the number 3 engine reaches its target speed, the engineer directs bleed air from that engine to start the outboard engine. The nose crewman gets notice from the engineer that external power is no longer needed and unplugs the Electra and clears the tug to begin the actual pushback. The tug, at the direction of the nose crewman, slowly begins to move the Electra into position as number 2 engine is started on the right side.
822. And we clear number 1. Start number 1 slip.
Finally, engine number 1 is cleared and started, and the flight attendants finish their pre-flight safety announcements. Meanwhile, the tug continues to get precise hand signals from the lead crewman to align the tug arm so that it can be disengaged, and the props glimmer in the afternoon sun. With a few hand cranks, the Electra is freed from the tug, and with a departure salute from the ground crew, we begin our taxi out, and the cockpit becomes a rather busy place in preparation for takeoff.
bugs. See the end box there? Like the trolls. Tight flow on the bottom. Takeoff briefing. Standard briefing call-outs. All power set. All the airspeed live. Cross-checked. 80 knots. 1. Rotate. V2. Positive.
After the pre-flight briefing and taxi checklists have been completed, the engineer moves the props out of the ground idle range to prepare for takeoff. The captain then carefully works to synchronize the prop horsepower gauges. The captain now applies full pitch to the props, and the Electra begins a rapid acceleration. With the gear and flaps up, we begin our climb with Tourniquet Arm and Portage Pass in the distance. The weather in Port Heiden is overcast with ceilings well below minimums, and the crew prepares to fly directly to Sandpoint instead, and determines that we will have to burn off a bit of fuel to meet the legal landing weight into Sandpoint's 4,000-foot runway. The crew makes the necessary calculations, and I explore the overhead panels and enjoy the buzzing and humming sounds of the engines at cruise. The weather at Sandpoint is clear, and I get my first glimpses of the remarkable volcanic chain of the Aleutians, with Popov and Dutton in the distance towards Cold Bay. On my left, the Shumagan Islands, where Sandpoint resides, begin to take shape, and we start our descent. Sandpoint is located on Popov Island, just south of Korovan Island, and just north of the much larger Unga Island, and its huge petrified forest that is estimated to be nearly 50 million years old. These islands are unique in the Aleutians, as their weather is moderated by the relatively warm Pacific Ocean. Warm at least in comparison to the bitterly cold Bering Sea just 50 miles north. Even still, a clear and sunny day like the one we're flying today is relatively rare, so rather than making a direct approach into Sandpoint, the crew elects to burn fuel by flying between Korovan and Popov Islands, and provides a visual feast of the Green Islands in late summer. These islands are host to eagles and buffalo, and the waterways between the islands often have whales during the springtime. But we find no wildlife today as we prepare for the landing.
I don't see any out here.
Having estimated our new landing weight, the crew prepares for a visual approach across the southeastern tip of Popov Island and turns right into final approach on runway 31.
That's all it's reading, but you look at the water out here, it's a lot more than 5 minutes. That's
It's hard to appreciate the challenge of flying into Sandpoint's small runway on this beautiful day. But it's easy to see that there's no room for error on this approach, and that few aircraft as large as the Electra would ever make it safely. On short final, the engineer calls out the speed relative to the reference airspeed for landing, and the captain settles the Electra on the center line. At touchdown, the large props are put into reverse mode, and the Electra slows quickly and safely. The props are then put into ground idle mode one at a time, and we taxi in. Our arrival into Sandpoint is greeted by a bald eagle on the MLS tower, and I'm thrilled to have such a gorgeous day to show the Electra.
Brakes are set. 1, 2, and 3 forward to get to the power.
One of the many distinctive sounds of the Electra is the cargo door opening. Here it opens to a breathtaking scene of props, mountains, and blue sky, and allows the crew to begin loading thousands of pounds of cod melt, which are abundant in the Aleutian Islands. The cargo pickup here will require the loading of fuel, which illustrates another reason the Electra is so well suited to fly in these remote parts. Fueling is controlled from a panel located right behind the right main landing gear, and the Electra's fuel system features very high flow rates and a very simple ground operation. In general, the Electra is easy to access for ground operations, and the Evolution ground crews move with skill to prepare the plane for departure back to Anchorage. I just as soon stay at Sandpoint for a while and admire the contrast of green islands, the blue waters, and the red and white of the Electra, and share the company of eagles. But this is not typical of Aleutian Island weather, nor Alaska's. Far more typical is the cold of winter, as shown in these next clips. During my March 1999 visit to Anchorage, we were hit with a large snowstorm, and it gave me a chance to show how both the ground and flight crews must fight the snow and ice and bitter howling winds to keep the Electras flying. In this segment, we watch a turnaround of the Electra in blowing snow and blizzard conditions. The flight engineer, who has the dubious honor of doing the walk-around in these conditions, checks the fuel levels in each wing tank by peering through a tube. She also checks the props, tires, and landing gear and ensures that the aircraft is secure in the wind. Electras depart Anchorage in the winter, they're treated with the standard de-icing chemicals and procedures. Once the wings are de-iced, however, the Electra is capable of feeding engine bleed air throughout the wing, creating a hot wing that will not have to be de-iced again so long as the engines are running. This, among many other features, gives the Electra an excellent dispatch reliability in cold weather. As this Electra taxis into the blizzard, the distinctive high-pitched whine of the Electra on the ground is particularly pronounced, and I grin as another childhood memory is reawakened. As hard as the groundwork is in the snow and cold, flying in these conditions demands the best also. On this wintry flight into Sandpoint, the crew is flying the GPS Charlie approach into runway 13. This will take us over the Alvat waypoint at 4,000 feet to clear a mountain, and then deploying at 2,300 feet to clear a small hill just before the runway. At this point, the crew should begin to make visual contact with the airport, and then fight crosswinds into a short and ice-covered runway. This is a typical Aleutian Island day, and these are the conditions where the Electra really earns the respect of her flight crews and passengers. Don't try this in a jet.
Hear what he said about the crosswind?
Yeah, it's right smack across, he says, so.
It's not surrender before letting ship is
Very
complete.
well. Take that mid torque for a moment or two.
Plus 27. Plus 27 on fastest. Plus 27. Plus 25. Plus 18. Plus 15. Plus 10. Plus 5. Rep. Out of 10.
We don't like
80 knots. 60 knots. Swing break.
Even if the Electra is not having to cope with ice and snow, she's challenged to show her muscle in departing Sandpoint with a healthy load of cargo and people. In this startup, taxi, and takeoff sequence from the passenger's perspective, we see a full power launch, and the Electra shows her exceptional abilities to deliver power and acceleration on demand. Note by looking at the edge of the props how the angle goes to 90 degrees as full power is applied for takeoff, and listen to the Allisons sing at their characteristic C-sharp pitch. After a remarkably short takeoff roll, we're gear up and at a sand point, and the Electra climbs quickly towards its 22,000-foot cruise altitude. As the Sheboygan Islands recede into the distance, we settle in for the cruise and enjoy the large windows and bright cabin. This flight's destination is Anchorage, but our video tour continues next with an approach into spectacular and dangerous Dutch Harbor on Unalaska Island. Dutch Harbor sits tucked in the north-central part of Unalaska Island, some 760 miles to the southwest of Anchorage. It is a natural harbor, protected from the Bering Sea by a flank of volcanoes and mountains, and is perhaps one of the most beautiful and also terrifying places to fly into. On this flight, in March 1999, we are greeted by a veil of snow clouds which obscure Unalaska until we fly through them. We then enter a cathedral of snow-covered volcanoes reflected in near still water, a rare treat that makes this approach into the 3,900-foot runway relatively easy, at least by Dutch Harbor standards. With Hog Island dead ahead, the crew prepares for its approach to the runway, which is tucked at the small, flat base of Mount Ballyhoo on the left. On this approach, we'll fly to the northern tip of Hog Island and make a continuous and gentle left turn onto final.
All right, gear down for landing checklist.
Landing gear.
Notice as the runway now comes into view, how it is virtually surrounded by volcanoes and mountains and has deep water at both ends. This approach always demands respect and precision, even on the rare, calm and sunny day. With Mount Newhall giving us an icy head-on stare, the captain makes a fine landing and we go into beta reverse with plenty of room to spare. In contrast to this ideal and calm afternoon where the surrounding mountains and the ever-present Mount Ballyhoo pose no risk, the next clip shows Dutch Harbor at its worst, and the Electra and her Reeve crew at their best. During that flight in June 1998, the crew battles blackwater, a form of micro water spouts, heavy crosswinds, and gusting wind shears. Now we're in the soup of typical Aleutian Island weather. The white caps of the Bering Sea indicate heavy gusts and black water in the harbor. The ceiling is about 3,000 feet, and Unalaska just appears out of the fog. At this point, we're coming into the harbor via the same route as we did on the earlier approach. Mount Ballyhoo is on the left, and the captain is flying towards Hog Island, with Tabletop Mountain on our immediate right. As we approach the spit, where the runway is cut out of the side of Mount Ballyhoo, the flight engineer calls out the airspeed every few seconds. You can hear the variation in the speed, which is caused by the gusting winds. It's critical for the captain to know these variations as he attempts to land. The closer we get to the runway, the less inviting the approach seems. The captain peers intently through his high-contrast glasses and chooses to go around.
Going back out? Yeah. 150. 155.
The instant thrust response from the big props changing pitch will allow the crew to compensate for the gusts, while the short wings of the Electra make her able to land in the over 50-knot crosswinds, unheard of in today's aircraft.
165 to 170. Here, 160 down 3 grade.
As we now fly just off to the side of Mount Newhall, the plane begins to get buffeted by wind shear, and the captain holds her steady into the crosswind.
150 to 55.
The runway is now off to our right, tucked under Hog Island. The flight engineer is calling out the airspeed relative to the targeted reference speed, and you can hear the props responding to the changes in thrust to compensate for the airspeed variations. This is an approach that will test every bit of a pilot.
Plus 15. Plus 10 to 12. Plus 15. Plus 5. 10 knot shears. Ref. 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 Minus 5. Plus 3. Plus 5. Ref. Minus 5. Minus 5. Minus 5. Minus 5. Minus 10. Minus 10. Minus 10. Minus 20. Minus 15. Minus 10. Minus 10. Right on. 100 knots. Tail lights are on. 80 knots. 60 knots. Nice job.
As we turn back to Mount Newhall, I instantly come to appreciate the skill of the Reeve crews and the remarkable toughness and responsiveness of the Electra. Our video tour of Reeve's Electra destinations has taken us from Anchorage to Sandpoint and Dutch Harbor, and we've seen the Electra working in some difficult conditions. Most of the time, however, the Electra's cruise calmly to and from the Aleutians, 21,000 feet of the cloud-socked Bering Sea, with their engines humming a restful lullaby. In this segment, we take an interlude to explore the volcanoes of the Aleutian Islands and to listen to the Allisons hum. Our first tour takes us to the Andrianoff Islands, about 2/3 of the way out on the Aleutian Island chain. Here resides the Great Sitkin Volcano, across from Adak Naval Air Station, and the majestic snow-covered Kanaga Volcano. Next, we cruise northeast to the Fox Islands, home of Dutch Harbor, and also to Makushin Volcano, Mount Okmuk, and Mount Vesubadov. It's strange, but this is what calls me to Alaska. This very sight of the Allison engines backlit by the sun. I remember this as a child. I recall the sounds and the smile of the oil cooler, the friendly face, as it were. And I know I've been blessed to see and feel the Electra again. I've had the rare opportunity to relive a bit of my past and make it real again. And I wish I could stay here all afternoon and bask in the northern skies. As we continue northeast, we fly over the Alaska Peninsula, north of the Shumagon Islands and Sandpoint, and find some of the most beautiful volcanic sites, including the towering Shishaldine volcano and the Pavlov and Dutton pairing, as well as Veniaminoff. Finally, we begin to make our way into the Cook Inlet towards Anchorage, with Iliamnia under our wingtip, and the Allisons and their props churning home in the late afternoon sky. The long Cook Inlet into the Anchorage area is flanked by active volcanoes such as the isolated volcano Augustine and the spectacular Mount Redoubt, shown here in both a peaceful rest and during eruption. And so our volcanic tour comes to an end, and we begin a descent into the Anchorage area and the end of our flight. The The relatively leisurely descent into Anchorage gives me time to reflect on my journey to see and hear the Electra in action one last time. I know that this is my last flight on the proud prop jet, and I'm thrilled to have captured so much of the grace of the aircraft. But I'm also saddened to know that soon the Electras will not be flying passengers anymore, and that the end of an aviation era is at hand. I am so grateful to the highly skilled and passionate flight crews of the Electra for having shared their world with me. They know what a special treat it has been to fly the Electra in some of the harshest and most beautiful terrain and weather on Earth, and to be able to depend on her for their safety. Despite early setbacks in the Electra's career that cost the lives of nearly 100 people, in the 22 years that Revolution has flown Electras in Alaska, they have not lost a single passenger, and the plane has proved beyond any doubt that it is a most remarkable and robust design. It is able to fly in terrible ice, can handle high crosswinds and gusts, can stop quickly and safely on snow and ice-covered runways, and the Electra can take off with large payloads from short fields that are surrounded by volcanic and mountainous terrain. In short, the Electra and Alaska were made for each other, and it will be a true loss to Alaskans when the Electra is gone. In fact, it will be a loss to the entire aviation world when the last passenger Electra is retired. I sometimes think that if the original factory tools had not been destroyed, it's likely that some modification of the Electra would still be manufactured today. Now, as we fly up Cook Inlet, the crew prepares to land on runway 6 right at Anchorage. A DC-10 ahead must do S-turns to reach the proper descent profile, and the crew watches carefully to maintain the needed separation for safety. And with Fire Island in the foreground, the crew prepares its final approach into Anchorage. Having requested a change to land onto runway 6 left, the crew now establishes itself on the glide slope, and we make our way towards Anchorage and the Chugach Mountains for one last time in the Electra. Sit back and enjoy the sounds of this proud bird as she comes home one last time.